Welcome back to Dark Screen Confessions, the channel where secrets never stay buried. Story 1: The Architect of Silence. Elias was a man who designed buildings meant to last for centuries, yet his own marriage was crumbling into dust. He suspected his wife, Clara, of having an affair with Julian, a young, charismatic musician who lived in the apartment below them. Elias didn't confront them. Instead, he became a master of surveillance. He installed hidden cameras, bugged their phones, and spent his nights obsessively reviewing footage. He wanted to catch them in a lie, to see the moment their betrayal solidified. One evening, while watching a high-definition feed, Elias saw something that stopped his heart. Clara was in the living room, whispering to Julian. But they weren't whispering about love. "He's getting closer," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He knows something is wrong with the house." Julian replied, "Don't worry. The soundproofing I installed behind the walls will keep him from hearing the basement." Elias froze. He lived in a house he had designed himself. There was no basement. Paranoia turned into cold, calculated terror. That night, while Clara was asleep, Elias took a sledgehammer to the drywall in the study, a room he rarely used. As the plaster cracked, he didn't find wiring or pipes. He found a door. A reinforced, soundproofed door leading to a staircase that went deep into the earth. He descended into a space that shouldn't have existed. Below his house was a perfect replica of his own home, a mirror image built with surgical precision. In this underground living room, he found journals scattered on a desk. They were written in his own handwriting. They detailed events of his life, but with one chilling difference. Every entry described a life he didn't remember living, with a wife who wasn't Clara. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Julian, but not the musician. This man was older, his face etched with the same weary lines as Elias. It was Elias, or rather, a version of him. "You weren't supposed to find the failsafe," the other Elias said, holding a syringe. Clara appeared behind him, her expression devoid of the warmth she showed upstairs. "You've been failing the integration tests for months, Elias," she said coldly. "Your psyche keeps rejecting the reality we built for you. We have to reset you again." Elias looked at his hands, then at the wife he thought he knew. He realized that the affair he had been obsessing over was simply a programmed distraction, a lure to keep his mind occupied while his memory was being harvested. "Is any of it real?" Elias whispered, his voice echoing in the artificial room. Clara smiled, a gesture that felt like a sharp blade. "The love was real, Elias. The tragedy is that we designed you to feel it for us, even though you know we aren't real." As the needle entered his neck, the last thing Elias saw was the ceiling of the underground room, the exact replica of his bedroom, flickering like a dying light bulb, signaling that the next cycle of his marriage was about to begin. Enjoying the stories so far? Subscribe to Dark Screen Confessions for more revenge stories, workplace drama, and unbelievable confessions. Now, let's continue. Story 2: The Mirror of Subjugation. Elena and Mark were the golden couple of the city. He, the stoic, wealthy philanthropist, and she, his ethereal, graceful wife. Their sprawling estate was a masterpiece of design, but its beating heart was a massive, antique mirror in the grand foyer, encased in blackened silver. Mark called it the truth teller. "In this glass," Mark would whisper to guests, his hand resting possessively on Elena's shoulder, There are no secrets. It reflects the soul as it truly is. Elena, however, lived in a state of quiet terror. She hated the mirror. She hated the way it seemed to hold her gaze, and she especially hated her reflection. While her physical body moved with elegance, her image in the glass often looked gaunt, her eyes hollow, and her mouth parted in a silent, jagged scream of agony. Yet, when she looked at Mark, his reflection was always radiant, a look of chilling, profound adoration that didn't match the cold, calculated control he exerted over her in the real world. The breaking point came on their 5th anniversary. Mark gifted her a necklace, a heavy piece of obsidian that felt unnaturally cold, almost like a parasite against her skin. "Wear it always," he demanded, his voice dropping into a register that made her blood run cold. "It anchors your essence. You must never be without it." That night, alone in the foyer, the obsidian pulsed against her collarbone like a heartbeat. Exhausted by the masquerade and the feeling that she was being slowly erased from her own life, Elena stared into the glass. Her reflection was pressing its palms against the inside of the mirror, its mouth wide in a desperate, soundless plea. "Help me," Elena whispered. To her shock, the reflection didn't just move, it stepped forward. The surface of the mirror rippled like a disturbed pond. Elena snatched a heavy bronze bust from a pedestal and slammed it into the frame, not to break it, but to shatter the barrier between them. The world turned inside out. She was yanked forward through a cold, pressurized membrane, falling into a dark, sterile inverse of her living room. She scrambled to her feet, gasping, expecting to be back in the foyer, but she was behind the glass. Looking out into the real world, she saw her own body standing in the foyer. But the figure wasn't her. It turned toward the mirror with a posture that was distinctly masculine, arrogant, and predatory. The Elena in the room reached up, peeled back a thin, translucent layer of skin near the jawline, and revealed a sliver of Mark's face beneath. "Thank you, darling." Mark's voice echoed through the glass, muffled and distorted. Managing the perfect wife persona is such an exhausting, tedious labor. I've been looking for a replacement for months. This vessel was beginning to wear thin, but you've kept her in such pristine condition. He patted the mirror affectionately, his smile wide and grotesque. "You'll love it in there. It's quiet. No one asks you to smile. No one asks you to play the part. You can just be a memory, a decoration in the grand design of my collection." He adjusted the wig of her hair, smoothed the dress, and turned on his heel, walking out of the foyer with a stride that was undeniably his own. Elena pounded against the glass, but it was now as solid as hardened steel. As she sank to the floor of the mirror dimension, the shadows retreated, and she saw them. The previous wives, the previous Elenas, all standing in the background. Dozens of discarded vessels that Mark had inhabited and shed once their utility was exhausted. She wasn't his wife. She was his latest suit of clothes. As the front door of the mansion opened and the sound of Mark's voice, now warm, soft and inviting, welcomed a new, unsuspecting guest into the house, Elena realized the cycle would never end. She leaned her forehead against the glass, watching the new guest admire the mirror, and began to scream, knowing that in this house of glass, no one would ever hear her. Enjoying the stories so far? Subscribe to Dark Screen Confessions for more revenge stories, workplace drama, and unbelievable confessions. Now, let's continue. Story 3. The Archive of Whispers. Julian and Clara lived in a luxurious penthouse, a space defined by floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of a city that never truly slept. Julian was a forensic audio technician, a man who spent his life filtering out the background noise of crimes to find the hidden truths buried in static. He adored Clara, a quiet, ethereal woman who spent her days tending to the lush indoor garden that made their home feel like a sanctuary. The dissonance began when Julian accidentally filtered a routine recording of their living room from a night he had fallen asleep at his desk. Tucked beneath the hum of the refrigerator was a voice, Clara's voice, whispering to an unseen listener. He still hasn't realized that every sound he hears has been edited. Julian's blood turned to ice. He began to wiretap his own marriage. He discovered that for the past 3 years, Clara had been installing infrasound emitters beneath the floorboards. These devices didn't play music or voices. They emitted low-frequency vibrations that kept the human brain in a constant, subconscious state of anxiety and mild hallucination. He had spent years believing he was suffering from work-related stress, when in reality, his emotional landscape was being programmed by the woman he loved. But when Julian finally pried up the floorboards to dismantle the emitters, he found something far more disturbing. Hidden in the foundation weren't just speakers, but a vast archive, thousands of photographs of him. There were photos of Julian sleeping, crying and eating, dating back 10 years, long before he had ever met Clara. Clara walked into the room, holding a glass of water. She didn't look panicked, she simply looked weary. She stared at the wreckage of the floorboards and offered a sad, hollow smile. "You always destroy the foundation on the 1095th day, Julian. You're so predictable." She explained that Julian wasn't her husband. He was a convicted criminal serving a life sentence for the murder of the real Clara. The government had repurposed him for a psychological experiment. They had wiped his memory, replaced it with a false history of a happy marriage, and hired Clara, a government operative, to play his wife. The goal was to see if a sociopath could be rehabilitated through the simulation of love. The 1095th day is when the simulation always breaks, Clara sighed, the exhaustion of a decade of acting dripping from her voice. "Every time you find out, we have to sedate you, reset your neuro pathways, and start the experiment over. I've been your wife 4 times now, Julian." Julian didn't believe her. He laughed, a jagged sound that filled the room. He lunged for a hidden compartment in his closet, pulling out an old, dusty tape recorder he had kept for years. He pressed play. The voice that emerged wasn't a victim's. It was his own, but it was cold, calculating, and predatory. Log entry. Day 1095. The play is a success again. She actually believes she is the handler of this project. She has no idea that I hired the contractors to install the infrasound and the hidden cameras years ago. She doesn't know that I'm the one who trapped her here, forcing her to believe she's a government agent watching over me. She killed my family a decade ago, and this is the only way to make her pay. Julian looked at Clara, who had gone deathly pale. The gentle, vulnerable husband persona evaporated, replaced by the eyes of a true predator. He wasn't the victim of a government experiment. He was a mastermind who had kidnapped his wife, gaslit her into believing she was a government agent, and trapped both of them in a perpetual manufactured loop of marriage just to watch her suffer for eternity. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her trembling face. "Don't worry, darling. Tomorrow we start over. You'll forget everything and we'll go back to being the perfect couple." Clara stood frozen, realizing that she wasn't a hero in a government program. She was a prisoner in a hell of her husband's design, waiting for the inevitable chemical reset that would force her to fall in love with her tormentor all over again. Thank you for listening to Dark Screen Confessions. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please subscribe and join us for more tales of revenge, drama, karma, and shocking confessions. Until next time, stay curious and remember, some secrets never stay buried.